This podcast includes descriptions of sexual abuse. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Carlos Virgen, and this is Cost of Silence, a podcast series that delves into the impact of sexual abuse cases in a Roman Catholic diocese in Connecticut. Attorney Kelly Reardon and the Reardon Law Firm have represented about 25 victims of Catholic Church sexual abuse. She joins us on this episode to talk about her work with the victims, the lawsuit and resultant bankruptcy, and her hopes for a legislative fix.
Our firm's representation goes back to well before I was a lawyer. I became a lawyer in 2009. And at that point, my father, who started the firm, had already represented probably somewhere upwards of 15 clergy sex abuse survivors. And he was very involved in the complaints that were initially filed once this issue came to light. And, it came to light largely due to journalists investigating. I mean, a lot of us have seen the movie Spotlight, and that's where things really started to unfold and unravel, and individuals started to take legal action. So at that point in time, he started receiving phone calls from individuals who were abused, and the scope of the problem became more apparent to him as more and more people were calling. When I started handling these cases, I came into the firm in 2009 and was working with him on pending cases. And it was very interesting to me because what occurred with these individuals was just so horrific and life-changing. And, there's nothing that you can do to make them better, but at least you can provide them with some form of justice and accountability. So I started handling these cases and became very invested in them and, found it to be not only rewarding, but also fascinating because many times you're having to go back through the diocesan records to find witnesses and people who complained 20, 30, 40 years ago about a particular priest. And then generally speaking, that priest would then be transferred to another parish. But it was putting the pieces of the puzzle together and finding all of these individuals. And the most remarkable thing in some of these cases was that I would find witnesses, and they would tell me on the telephone, I complained to Bishop Riley in 1972 about this particular priest, and he didn't do anything about it. And they were so willing to help because they knew that so many years had gone by and nothing had been done.
Working with victims of sexual abuse.
We do our best to make people as comfortable as possible. Oftentimes, what that means is that they don't share the full story the first time you meet with them. Little bits of information come out as they become more comfortable with you. I tell people when I meet with them for the first time, you don't have to tell me everything right now. Just tell me what you're comfortable with. Just give me a little bit of a general overview, and if you're not ready to go into the details, that's okay. Just take your time. I've had many grown men sit across from me crying. I mean, it's horrific, it's incredibly difficult for these people to talk about what occurred even 20, 30, 40 years later. And it's totally destroyed their lives in many instances. But you just try to take your time with them and tell them that they don't need to share everything at once. They should feel comfortable and know that everything that's disclosed and discussed is confidential. It's attorney-client privilege communications. And, they should tell us what they're comfortable telling us, and hopefully the rest will come with the details that emerge later on.
Many of the stories Kelly Reardon heard from her clients were the stories of abuse and rape that took place at Mount St. John Academy in Connecticut during the late 80s and into the mid-90s. Mount St. John was a residential school run by the Diocese of Norwich to serve at-risk children with behavioral and emotional problems. The school was closed in 2013 due to declining enrollment and increasing costs. Allegations were made against the late brother K. Paul McGlade, also known as Brother Paul. The lawsuits allege the men were fondled and raped when they attended the school as boys and teenagers. Brother Paul was the school's executive director beginning in 1990 and was also a teacher there.
So for the most part, it would be sort of a grooming process, and Brother Paul would get these kids into his office or get them privately into a location in the school, the gym, or wherever. He would pray with them. And he would tell them that what they were doing was for God. He would tell them that they needed to do it, and he would threaten that if they told anybody, they would get sent to Long Lane, which is a place that they did not want to go because it was, another school for troubled kids, but even worse. And so this is what happened with most of these kids. And the really sad part is how he would tell them, he would intertwine what he was doing with religion and justify it by using religion. And many of these people have a great deal of difficulty not only trusting authority figures, but, having any involvement with religion because of the fact that they were essentially told by this man that this was for a greater religious purpose. It was what God wanted.
The lawsuits and bankruptcy.
A lot of times people complain about the fact that our legal system, our civil system, results in money damages, but that is what we have. That's the only thing that we have to help put these people back in as much of a better place as they can be. And, is there a way to turn back the clock? No. So we have to rely on the court system and seek compensation for the harm that was caused. So as the listeners might remember, the reason why the diocese says that they filed bankruptcy is because of the problem at Mount St. John in Deep River, which was a school for troubled boys. And there were so many lawsuits pending against the diocese related to this school that they operated called Mount St. John, and a particular brother called Brother Paul, who was molesting kids there for many years. So they decided that they felt it was in their best interest to file bankruptcy. Most of the over 48 claimants, the time-barred claimants, were abused in parishes, not at Mount St. John. And the reason for that is because Brother Paul didn't come to Mount St. John until later in time. And so the individuals who have Mount St. John claims are almost exclusively under 48. So the parishes and the schools and the other Catholic entities where these over 48 folks were molested are separate corporations that are not in bankruptcy. The only corporation that filed for bankruptcy is the diocese.
The Claimants Committee.
The Claimants Committee, the way it works in a bankruptcy, particularly where you have the vast majority of the claimants making claims against the diocese for compensation, are sexual abuse survivors. So the court required, and the trustee, the United States trustee, required that a group of individuals be selected, and they accepted applications, and they picked 5 men in this particular case, all of them Mount St. John abuse survivors, who would have a fiduciary obligation to represent the entire group of survivors, all the claimants. And they all volunteered their time. They're not getting any compensation for it, but they felt very strongly that they wanted to be a part of the process to make sure that they were fairly representing everybody's interests. And so they then had the ability to hire bankruptcy counsel in order to represent all of the claimants in the bankruptcy. And after interviews, they selected a firm called Zeisler and Zeisler, and the lawyers who are responsible for this particular case, Steve Kinseth and Eric Kenzie and Dan Bird. And so those 3 lawyers have been working on behalf of all of the claimants and being specifically directed by the committee members over the past year and a half to try to reach a resolution. And so, I've gotten to know those lawyers very well. I've gotten to know the committee members very well. One of the committee members is my client, Sam Garcia. And I use his name because he's one of the only ones that I'm aware of that is willing to use his name. He's a very brave guy. And Sam is on the committee, and there's other men who are on the committee. They come from all walks of life. They live in different parts of the country, and they spend a tremendous amount of time working on this, having meetings, understanding the process, listening to the bankruptcy lawyers, making decisions on behalf of the entire class of claimants. And they're amazing guys. I mean, these are people who've been through so much in their life, not to mention the fact that they were put at Mount St. John probably because they had some problem in their life. You know, they all did. They had a family issue. They had a juvenile justice issue. So then they get to Mount St. John and they get molested. I honestly can say that the claimants committee, who are representing as a fiduciary all of the claimants who were sexually abused and have made claims in the bankruptcy, have done a tremendous job of working very hard to try to reach a resolution with the diocese on behalf of all the claimants. They're smart. They are reasonable. They have a tremendous amount of common sense and street smarts. And they've made a lot of concessions, you know, because they want to get this done for the other people who are involved. Everybody wants this done. And unfortunately, the diocese has presented a plan that is just not agreeable. It's not enough. It's not enough for all 140 approximately claimants. And it doesn't reach deep enough into the pockets of the various entities that are involved in this bankruptcy, which are not just the diocese, but also the parishes, the schools, and other related institutions. And so recently, the committee made the decision that their lawyers would be filing a challenge to the plan and a motion to terminate exclusivity, which essentially means that they want the court to say that they're permitted to file their own plan, their own proposed plan of reorganization for the diocese. And the plan, I can tell you, is going to propose a much larger settlement and specifically provide the manner in which the funds will be raised, because there are a lot of ways that the diocese could be putting more money into the pot than they are. With other cases that have been filed around the country, and as you know, I'm sure there are lots of diocesan bankruptcies that have been filed around the country. I don't think it's terribly uncommon for, for there to be a failure to reach an agreement and for the committee to actually have to take the affirmative step of saying, we're going to come up with a plan on our own. If you can't figure out a way to compensate us completely and fairly, then we're going to ask the court to give us permission to find a way.
Time-barred claimants are those victims, per Connecticut's statute of limitations, who were abused as a child and did not file a lawsuit before the age of 48. The law is 30 years after majority.
Proposal that was made by the diocese is that each individual who is over the age of 48, what they're calling the time-barred claimants, each one will be receiving a payment of $2,500. And the folks that I've spoken to that I represent were shocked when I informed them of that information and were insulted, to say the least. They were not pleased with that type of a proposal, and certainly to them that's not justice. It's really difficult to understand how these individuals can be told by this entity that destroyed their lives that the most they're entitled to get is $2,500. So they're saying, Tim McGuire, we want you to sign a release that says that you are not going to be permitted to sue a parish in the future if you get the right to do so by a legislative change. And in exchange, we're going to give you $2,500. To me, it seems inconceivable that the parishes and the schools who have hundreds of millions of dollars in assets and real estate would throw $2,500 at each person and think that that's enough. It's not. They should be offering a fair number. They have a tremendous amount of money. There are properties that are sitting vacant. There's real estate that can be sold. There's bank accounts that have money in them. There are parishes that are quite wealthy. I mean, nobody's saying that the parishes that are having great difficulty should be the ones necessarily putting in a tremendous amount of money, but there are parishes that have a lot of assets. And so we feel very strongly on behalf of these people that they should not be forced to sign a release for $2,500 when there's a possibility in the future that they might actually have a right to sue if the law gets changed.
A legislative fix.
It's a legislative fix that has been on the table for years now, but has unfortunately never gotten anywhere in the Judiciary Committee or gotten a vote on the legislative floor. And the fix is, as many states have done over the past several years and are continuing to do, many states have entirely eliminated the statute of limitations, which is the deadline for filing a civil sexual abuse lawsuit for children. So, I strongly feel that there should be no time limitation on when somebody can file a lawsuit when they were abused as a child, because we know from the studies that we were talking about that most people don't come forward until they reach age 52. But that's average. There are people who come forward when they're 75 years old, or 80 years old, or 60 years old, or 48 years old in one day. So why should they have any different rights than the people who are under the age of 48? And the legislature has been considering for years eliminating the statute of limitations entirely, but it hasn't happened. I don't know why it hasn't happened. It seems to me like in Connecticut, which is a fairly liberal state, we should be passing this law right away. There's states like Louisiana that have eliminated the statute of limitations, but we haven't done it. And, I think that it's really important for the governor to take a very strong authoritative position on this, because he can certainly, obviously he can't tell the legislature what to do, but with his support, I think it is something that could be passed. Rhode Island did it pretty recently. New York did it. And New York actually established what's called a look-back window, because normally when you change a law, like a statute of limitations, it doesn't apply to acts that occurred before the law changed. So for purposes of molestation claims, we could change the law right now so that there was no statute of limitations, but unless the legislature said specifically in the law that it applies retroactively to everybody that was molested before the day the law changes, it wouldn't matter to any of those people. So the solution that a lot of states have used is that they have a window of a year or 2 years where anybody can file a claim, whether they were barred previously or not. And so what we would hope in Connecticut, if the law does get changed, is that they not only eliminate it, but they also create some kind of window so that, for a period of time, whatever the legislature determines is appropriate, usually a year, anybody, regardless of their age, can file a lawsuit. And then if they want from, the date of the law passing forward for it to just be, prospective, not retroactive, then that's certainly fine. But people should be allowed to go back and file claims.
Disenchanted with the Church.
There are a lot of people who are really disenchanted with the Catholic Church and who really want nothing to do with it anymore. That is sad, because there is a lot of good that can be accomplished through religions, whether it be the Catholic Church or other religions. And, nobody's here to say, I think, that the Catholic Church doesn't do good. They do. They help a lot of people. But the manner in which this scandal, as you called it, has been handled by the Diocese of Norwich and others around the country is just caused a lot of people to question why they're part of this organization and whether they want to remain so. And so that's a real shame. Specifically relating to the bankruptcy, I think that the one of the terms of the proposal that the diocese put out was the sale of St. Bernard's School. And I've seen a lot of comments online on different forums and heard a lot of things from people about that because they feel very strongly that the students in the St. Bernard's community are being punished and that the bishop should have made different decisions about where to raise the funds. I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, look, my obligation is to my clients. So wherever the money comes from to get them compensation, it comes from. I'm not going to complain. But do I think that there are other places where the bishop could have decided to find the money? I do. You know, it just makes the Catholic community around Eastern Connecticut even more upset about the way that this entire matter has been handled.
Earlier this month, a U.S. bankruptcy court judge approved the Mohegan tribe's $6.5 million purchase of the 113-acre parcel that includes St. Bernard School. The sale specifies that the tribe will lease a 43-acre portion of the property to the school for the next 20 years for $1 a year. If you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual abuse or assault, you can contact the Survivors Network of those abused by priests at 877-SNAP-HEALS. That's 877-762-7432. You can also contact the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network at 800-656-4673 and the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Cost of Silence is a production of The Day. Production, editing, and music by me, Carlos Virgen. It is co-produced by Karen Florin and Joe Wojes. The series relies on the extensive reporting done by Joe Wojes, staff writer and editor at The Day. The Day's executive editor is Isaskun Larrañeta, and our managing editor is Karen Florin.